video game movies, where corporate branding and boardroom thinking come together to treat beloved video game characters abominably. Some will attempt to remain fleetingly faithful to the source material, and some will take them in radical, pointless new directions. And there are some that really don't bother at all. I am Chris Hall, and today I bring you Double Dragon. Double Dragon is 2 parts dragon and 1 part vanilla. Double Dragon is a 1994 action comedy starring Scott Wolf and Mark Drakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakakak things are less than peachy. When the evil Shuko, played by Robert Patrick, sets his sights on the elusive Double Dragon amulet, a magic artifact that will give him ultimate power, or as much power as 90s CGI could actually give him, and rule the city! So it's up to the boys to try and stop him, fail and then try and stop him again because of persevering and morals maybe? I don't know. Will they succeed? Well, it's a kids movie, so yeah. Double Dragon features Robert Patrick, who in this movie looks like Vanilla Ice's dad, who in turn looks like Jedward's dad. But you know who doesn't look like anybody's dad? Modern clones. Double Dragon is of course based upon the video game of the same name, and like all video game based movies, it only has a vague, tenuous connection to the plot or story of the original source material, which is perfectly fine, as Double Dragon the video game only has a vague connection to any kind of story whatsoever. It's all just context, and a reason for you to beat people up, and for Namco to take all your pocket money. Bonanza. So getting angry and annoyed that this isn't a totally faithful retelling of the original source material is a little bit naive, and if you want that kind of review, you're probably best off looking elsewhere. I'm looking at this as purely a movie and nothing else, and as a movie, well, its story is there. This is a movie about two lads trying to stop an evil genius from capturing this evil amulet and using the magic within it to make him unstoppable. But even with these very lofty stakes, there's nothing about the movie which feels as if there's any kind of jeopardy or agency or any kind of real fear. And the big contributing factor to this is the fact that so much of this movie feels horribly uninspired. So much of it feels like it's just been produced out of a series of corporate boardroom meetings, as opposed to there being any kind of enthusiasm or creative spark to take this material to the big screen. It's just plug-in element after plug-in element, pop culture reference after pop culture reference, all of which will age horribly, some very limp slapstick, basic character drama, and a popular song of the time used horribly out of context. It's a model which has been used for decades and is still being used to this very day. Look at any DreamWorks movie and you'll see the same thing going on and on and on and on. And, well, you can't really claim that this movie is really a movie with that in mind. It's just a product, nothing more, nothing less. It's so much of a product that if you look very carefully during the scene which Robert Patrick is in the gang's little lair, you can see the words "Made in Taiwan" printed on his cheek. Nothing's really done to try and establish anything by the most superficial of markers. He's the bad guy, he's mean, they're the good guys, they're nice, and that's just about as far down the rabbit hole as we get to any real character development. They'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. Instead, the makers of this movie spent more of the time trying to establish the world and make it more believable, as though we'd never seen a dystopian science fiction future before. Even though the world and its nature speaks plainly enough for itself. It's a future, it's crime-ridden, there's a problem with the air, there's gangs everywhere, there's rubbish in the streets, there's ruins all over the place. It's like modern-day Detroit.
And if it gets in your mouth, you get diarrhea for a week and all your hair falls out.
All that we really need to know about this world is established very, very early on into this movie through one caption and one shot of the city, and that's all we really need. Anything else happens organically through conversation or things that we actually see within the movie. But sadly, the maker of this movie seemingly thought that violent street thugs, dark lighting and ruins everywhere was way too subtle for the audience, so they decided to add these very subpar, sub-Robocop newsreels into proceedings to try and add context and to help us to understand this very complex world that little bit better. But more often than not, it just tells you stuff that you already knew.
It's so
Sunday. You're watching the Raiders Gladiators.
The two only real positives that I have for this movie is that the costume design and the set design are pretty good, all things considered. And during some fairly limp action sequences, we can see some pretty damn good backdrops, which make you for a very fleeting second think that they actually spent some time trying to develop and make this movie a real movie. But sadly, soon after, it ends up switching out to something else, which makes you wonder why the hell they even bothered.
Madonna's in the news.
In any case, the gangs in this movie once again look really, really good. They have a very distinct look to them, something that actually makes each gang stand out from the other. And thankfully, we don't get any kind of newsreels telling us about the gangs and their history and who they are. Everything we need to know about them speaks for themselves and gives us something to speculate in our own free time. Show, don't tell. It's what's for dinner.
Tragic, isn't it?
Once again, everything that we need to know about this world and the things within it is established very, very, very early on into the movie. So these newsreels add nothing of real value to the whole experience. But other fact they're wholly annoying, there's nothing about them which actually aids or helps the movie, as once again, they tell us stuff that we already knew, but more importantly, they are so tonally different to the scenes prior to them, and subsequently, they stick out like a sore thumb. This movie as a whole entity is fairly straight and naturalistic. These newsreels are wacky and satirical. This juxtaposition really doesn't work, in particular as just when you think this movie is about to turn a corner, just when you think we're about to get some kind of character development or some kind of story development, it snaps out to one of these arseholes.
Get a job.
In terms of performance, our two leading men are just plain poor. They're supposed to be brothers, but there's nothing about their dynamic that makes it feel as though they are brothers, and, well, yeah, they may not look related, but that still didn't stop Delboy and Rodney. These two guys have no on-screen chemistry towards one another whatsoever, which would make it suggest as though they were related in any capacity, be that brothers or second cousins or whatever. But this isn't exactly helped by the fact that, once again, just when you think they're going to turn a corner, just when you think there's going to be some kind of connection, it immediately switches out to something else.
Yeah, you're right. For once.
Open up. Here comes another airplane.
No more sinnage.
But even with that said, our two leads have got very little going for them in terms of what their character really is. I can't tell you what their traits or personalities, even on the most basic and superficial of levels. All I can tell you is that they're good guys, and that's just about it. I can't tell you who's the wacky, silly one and who's the straight and serious one. I can't do that because they're both totally bland and ineffectual. So much so that Alicia Milano's bottom pulls a better performance than these two jokers.
Security occupied by now. Come on, let's go.
There is one fairly decent performance within this movie, which is Robert Patrick as Shuko. He chews through the scenery like a beaver at an oak furniture showroom, treating this movie with the right level of commitment and tone. Daft, silly and cartoony. Three things that this movie really should have been from the very beginning.
I just want total domination of one major American city. Is that too much to ask for? Is it? Huh?
Because at least then that would have added some kind of spark and zest and energy and life into this movie, which it desperately needs. And that is flirted with here and there, but it's never really sustained long enough. The only period where it's sustained to a point where you can actually feel that is at the end of the movie, which means this movie is at absolute best when it ends. That's not a joke, by the way, this movie is at its best at the end. In the closing scenes to this movie, once the bad guy has been dealt with and the day has been saved, the movie suddenly loosens up. Not that it was very taut to begin with, and we suddenly get something that feels a little more light, a little more buoyant, a little more zesty, something that does have character.
Never seen a postman move that fast.
It's not earth-shattering, it's not amazing, but at least it's something. Something that does have some kind of life force and zest and energy to it. Something that does feel in some way inspired. And it feels oddly apt for this kind of story. All the way through this movie you get these hints of some kind of wackiness, some kind of silliness, which, you know, we don't need to see those bits again, so we'll move on. This movie's plot and its main bad guy feel like something out of a Saturday morning cartoon, so it makes sense for it to have that kind of approach, but sadly it doesn't. We only really get that to a discernible and concentrated degree right at the very end of this movie. It feels light, it feels fresh, it feels loose. Not that it was ever dark and brooding to begin with, but at least now it has some kind of character towards it. Had this movie been like this from the very beginning, it may not have been brilliant, it may not have been great, but at least it'd be something a little bit more memorable, and maybe here now in the year 2015 it could have been considered a so bad it's good kind of movie, but sadly it isn't. What we get feels fairly ineffectual and fairly unremarkable. I'd be willing to forgive an unremarkable, ineffectual story and characters had there been some kind of energy towards the whole movie. Something I could say, watch this movie because it is so strange and so daft, but sadly it doesn't. So, needle nardle no.
Eat some fish, butthead!
So the big question, can I recommend it? Nah. Double Dragon is typical of that era's, or indeed any era's, video game movie. It's a poorly thought through product that doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. But rather than flip-flopping between two conflicting tones, it all just flirts with several different ones, but never really commits long enough for it to be truly noticeable. And whilst the environments and the set design look cool, that seems to be the only area that the makers of the movie spent any time trying to develop. The characters and plot development is limped to non-existent. And I can't in all honesty recommend this movie just for the sake of set design and nothing else. This movie isn't horrid or annoying or even that bad. It's just unremarkable. So there we have it, Double Dragon. 7/8 an uninteresting movie, 1/8 an interesting movie, half decent set design and no pie. It's all one massive shame really. This is a movie which does have some kind of odd nostalgic 90s charm to it, but that's the only real charm it has to it, which is a shame. The ending is interesting, quite a bit fun, but sadly as a whole entity it's fairly naff. I'd say that I felt ripped off in buying this, but I did only get it for £1, which is about as much worth as it really is. Oh dear. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really have an exit joke for this, so...
Tragic, isn't it?